Hello, and welcome to the Skilled Assessor's Introduction to the Coordinated Entry System. My name is Liza DeShano, and I'm the Coordinated Entry Specialist at the Center for Housing and Health. Here's a list of what we'll be covering in this presentation. Let's get started. The Chicago Coordinated Entry System was rolled out in 2017 in response to a federal mandate that all continuums of care, or COCs, adopt this streamlined approach to prioritizing and distributing resources. The Chicago COC is comprised of more than 100 organizations and individuals who work together to prevent and end homelessness in Chicago. Representatives from each of these agencies work together to support implementation and refinement of CES in Chicago. But why CES? Coordinated entry is a front door approach for people experiencing homelessness to access housing and support. Before CES, the responsibility of finding housing support was largely placed on people experiencing homelessness. With CES, there is one assessment that provides access to housing resources all over the city, so clients are not restricted to resources that are close to their location, and they don't have to repeat their story for every single application. Further, CES increases access because referrals are not based on the preferences or contacts a case manager has. In fact, clients don't even have to have a case manager to be assessed for CES. Lastly, people get linked to resources that match their needs instead of just the first resource that's available. CES matches households to a variety of permanent and short-term housing solutions. Here's the CES workflow. The steps that you are responsible for as a skilled assessor are circled in red. I will explain each of these steps in this presentation. First, engage. The first step of CES is engaging the target population. Access points designated for walk-in CES assessments and updates are located on each side of the city at locations where people experiencing homelessness visit in high volumes. These are highlighted in red. There are also some shelters, drop-in centers, and outreach teams who have skilled assessors on staff. Here are the locations of the access points. This is also available on the CSH website. The next step of the workflow is assess. But before you assess someone, you need to verify that the person is eligible for CES. Here's why eligibility is so important. First, you don't want to waste your time or the client's time. Second, it's better for the client to find out now rather than later if they're not eligible. For instance, if the client is matched to a housing provider who learns that the person is not literally homeless, they will not move forward with housing the client. Third, while time is being taken for the housing provider to interview that person, determine they are not eligible, and request another match, there's an empty unit that someone else could have had. And lastly, empty units could result in HUD providing less funding next time around because it looks like we don't need the funding. So who's eligible? Adults ages 25 and over who are experiencing literal homelessness, and youth ages 18 to 24 who are unstably housed or experiencing literal homelessness are eligible for CES. You can determine who is experiencing literal homelessness and therefore who is eligible for CES by asking, "Where did you sleep last night?" People who slept outside or in a shelter or are fleeing domestic violence are always eligible and can move forward with the CES assessment. So you've determined the client is eligible. The first part of the CES assessment is identification and housing eligibility. It contains yours and the client's contact information, location of the assessment, housing history, income, sheltered status, and length of time homeless. It is important to include detailed, updated contact information so that when the household is matched to a housing intervention, we are able to connect with them. The second part of the assessment is the VI, which covers any disability information and the client's trauma history. When you finish the assessment, make sure the client knows to update their assessment regularly. Give them the client brochure with their HMIS number and your contact information. Next in your workflow is triage. If the person is a veteran, a youth, fleeing domestic violence, or needs shelter tonight, attempt to connect them to an immediate resource. These are things that might come up during the assessment. There are almost 9,000 people on Chicago's One List. The One List is populated from HMIS and includes information on all people currently experiencing literal homelessness in Chicago. Over half of those on the One List have been assessed for the coordinated entry system. One List information is always available on the All Chicago dashboard. Catholic Charities gets notified about a unit vacancy from a housing provider, and then uses the One List to match a household that meets the eligibility criteria for the unit and is the most vulnerable according to our system's prioritization plan. There's a limited amount of resources available for housing, and so we must dedicate our resources to those who are the most vulnerable. Our community made the decision to prioritize those who have been homeless for the longest amount of time and those who are unsheltered. You can read more about the prioritization plan on the CSH website. The last step in your workflow is the match. When someone you've assessed is matched to housing, you will receive an email from Catholic Charities. When you receive an email like this, you are responsible for reaching out to the client to let them know about the match and give them information to connect with the housing provider. The email will also include the housing provider the client is matched to and the housing system navigator. Housing system navigators can help clients get documents together and make appointments with the housing provider. When you reply to the email, make sure you hit reply all to keep everyone in the loop. Applicants become inactive after 30 days if their only encounter with the homeless system is the CES housing assessment. These applicants need to update their assessment every 30 days. If households receive services from a homeless provider such as a shelter, outreach, or drop-in center, they will remain active while they are working with the program and do not need to update their assessment unless information changes. If households re-engage, they do not need to start a new assessment. Finally, as a skilled assessor, you are responsible for keeping clients' information private, doing enough assessments to maintain familiarity with the system, completing the assessment fully and accurately, attending at least 2 trainings per year, as well as the quarterly skilled assessor meeting, and providing high-quality care to each client that you encounter. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, concerns, or feedback in response to this training. Thank you for listening.
Hi everyone, my name is Anna Carvelin. I am a system implementation specialist with All Chicago, and I'm going to walk you through the coordinated entry assessment on HMIS. HMIS stands for the Homeless Management Information System, and the software that HMIS is on is Service Point. So I'm here on Service Point on HMIS. We're going to get in here later. I'm going to show you around a little bit first. So this training is specific to coordinated entry, and I cover the general HMIS information more broadly, since most of you will have done the Intro to HMIS course already. But I will cover some of the general information as well. So if you are a skilled assessor who will only be in HMIS for coordinated entry and you have not been required to do the HMIS introductory course, I recommend you do that. And what you're going to do is go to the Learning Management Information System and search for Introduction to Homeless Management Information System. And you'll need to create an account in order to do that. But that'll walk you through some of the real basics of HMIS, and then I'm going to go through the specifics for coordinated entry. So before you sit down to assess somebody, you first want to make sure that they are eligible for coordinated entry. A couple of the things you're going to look at is their homelessness status and their age. And so first you have to determine their age. Are they 18 or above? You don't want to be assessing anybody under 18. If they are over 24, they need to be literally homeless, fleeing domestic violence, or human trafficking in order to be eligible for an assessment. And then if they are 18 to 24, which is considered youth by HUD's definition, they need to be any of the above that I listed, and also or unstably housed. And those definitions are online. You can find that if you search for the homeless definition and the HUD exchange, and this information is listed here. I'm not going to go through that in a lot of detail, but you should be aware of these, and we do host trainings for this information on and off, so keep an eye out for those. But you should be very familiar with the definition of literally homeless and some of these other definitions as well. So again, we, aside from the homelessness status and the age, you want to make sure that the client is actually okay with sharing their information on HMIS. So that means they're okay sharing some of their real basic information. And so that means that they're choosing option A or B on the client consent form. And so you'll get yourself familiar with the All Chicago Help Desk, which I am going to, you will have links to these as well. But this client consent is explained here in this article, and also you can download this to have handy, these forms handy, because you're going to need this for every single client. You'll fill one of these out. And so the choosing option A or B just means that they are, if they choose A, that they're okay with sharing their basic information with the entire continuum. That means all homeless providers in Chicago. And if they choose option B, they are okay sharing their information with the matching team, as well as any homeless provider that they, any housing provider that they are matched to. And so the other thing is, regardless of what the client chooses on here, you're going to lock their record if they choose option B, but also if they have HIV positive status, or they're fleeing domestic violence, or they've been involved in human trafficking as a human trafficking victim. So the other things to know, and what you should probably have open as you're starting this process, is the Skilled Assessor Workflow, which is here also on the help desk, and you can print this out and have handy as well. And you can also have open this housing history tool in the assessment. This housing history tool is something that we've included in the assessment in order to determine the length of time homeless for clients, and we are using that to prioritize clients in terms of their length of homelessness. And so it's really important, A, to fill it out at all, and B, to get it as accurate as possible for the client. And so this is an article that you will have a link to as well. So once we have determined that our client is over 18, they are eligible in terms of their housing status, they are willing to share their basic information in HMIS, then we can open up our HMIS system and we can assess the client. So I'm going to go ahead and log in here. And you'll notice I'm at the chicago.servicept.com training site. So I'm in the training site, which everybody will have to do a fake client input on the training site, and then I will review that. And then later you'll get into the real site, which is basically the same URL minus the training. So the first step for most skilled assessors once they're in HMIS is to go into enter data as mode. And that's where you click right up here to enter data as a skilled assessor. So I like to think of this as you're switching hats. Like let's say you're at your agency and you put a client in to your project and then you have to assess them. You would change your project into the skilled assessor project by going into enter data as. That's one way to think about it. But basically, the only people that will not be doing enter data as are the skilled assessors who their only project is coordinated entry. So that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to go into enter data as, and if you've got multiple projects like I do, you're going to search by either typing in the number of the project, which is 1474, or you'll type in coordinated entry up here and just do a search. So I clicked, I'm in enter data as mode, and it says that up here if I ever need to double check. And then we're going to choose, we're going to be entering our client. So just to give you a little background about the client that we're going to work with today, she's 34 years old. She has 4 kids. She tells me she's been living behind the library with her kids over the summer. And right before that, she was in a shelter, but it was really crowded, so she wanted to leave. And then prior to that, she was living with a friend, and after she left her husband, she was living with a friend after she left her husband, and her husband was physically abusive. And so for this scenario, I'll assume that today's date is August 15th, 2019. And so what we're going to do, first we have to see if the client is in there. And I'm going to call her Ida. So first we have to go to the client point, search for the client. We don't want to be entering duplicate records, so we're going to search for the client. I do not see her name in here. So we're going to go ahead and finish adding some of this basic information before we add the new client with this information. So yes, her full name was reported, her social security we've got in there, her full social was reported, and she's not a veteran. So we're going to go ahead and add new client with this information. We're always going to pick the middle option. And for now, we'll choose single female, because even though she's got 4 kids, we're only going to enter the head of household into coordinated entry. And then we'll press continue down here at the bottom. This is the head of household. You're only ever going to enter the head of household into the coordinated entry project. Now that doesn't mean you won't sometimes have a whole household of 5 people in HMIS, but then you're only going to enter the head of household into coordinated entry. So we'll save and exit out of the household information. And so I was mentioning that Ida has had a history of domestic violence, so we want to lock this record. We're going to click this little lock here and get rid of this global. Sometimes when you click that, it'll say restricted. What you're going to do then is email hmis@allchicago.org, and one of us can lock the record for you. But for now, so we've locked the record. We have already had Ida's client consent form signed along with her supplemental information, and because let's just say I'm an outreach person, I'm on the field quite a bit, I don't have a place to hold all of those files. I can go ahead and go into the client profile information and upload the file here. So I scanned the consent, and then I'm going to choose file to get the scanned consent form. I can also upload all kinds of other scanned documents that can be useful in the future, like social security card and whatever else might be useful. So that can be handy, but do not enter any other information in this part of the client profile. So what we're going to do is head over to entry exit. If you're familiar with other projects, you're used to adding an ROI. We don't need to do that for coordinated entry. We're just going to go ahead into the entry exit and add an entry exit. And so it should default to this coordinated entry. The other thing you want to note, like let's just say there was a household with 5 people in it and they were all listed right here. We're only going to want to have the head of household clicked. So typically you'll just ignore this area. You won't add any people to the entry. You'll just have the default, which is the head of household. So then the type is going to be HUD, and then the project start date is typically today, although you may have conducted an assessment on paper 2 days ago. That's okay, then you would just backdate it to the 13th. But we're going to pretend it's today. I did the assessment. I'm doing the assessment in real time online. So I'm going to save and continue. So here we are in the assessment. The only things that you're going to pay attention to up here is this assessment, which it defaults to, and then later you're going to do the VI disability. Some dedicated skilled assessors will go to this diversion pre-screener, and eventually we may ask that everybody does this pre-screener first, but for now you're just going to focus on this assessment. So for these top questions about attempts, you're going to don't concern yourself with these two. This has to do with people who may need an observational assessment in the future, and this is just to say that you had tried your best to do the assessment, but they likely will need an observational assessment. We want to see that at least 2 attempts were made. Typically you will not look at this, and you don't need to get in here. So we do need to know the client consent for data sharing. So we need the client consent for data sharing checked, and this is a yes. They completed it. So this will always be yes, because you should have done that before you got in here. What can change is this option. So they may have chosen A or B. In our case, they chose B, that they would share their basic information as a locked file. So we did lock the file. And then maybe they come back later and say they don't want to share their information, then we would just adjust this and we would choose whatever option that they chose. For now, we're choosing B. And then we definitely want your information in this section. And we need for you to update this information. If you were to come in here and another assessor had assessed this person and you came in and didn't update, or you had to change something, we want your information, because eventually if they're matched to housing, we want to reach out to the most recent skilled assessor that had worked with the client. So you will be included on a matching email. The client name, relationship to head of household, of course, we need all of this information. Date of birth, we need all of this, especially the bolded information is really key. We need all of this information filled out accurately. We definitely want to know about their military service, because they may be eligible for certain housing based on their military service, so you definitely want to fill that out accurately. The client contact information is pretty key to getting in touch with them later if they're matched to housing. So you want to make sure to fill out their information as well as any contact information, any alternative contact information, like if they had a sibling or a friend or something, a neighbor or something, just any alternative information so we can eventually get in touch with them. And you can also share some information about how to get in touch with them. The household composition is important. So we know that this household is 5 people. We've got 1 adult and we've got 4 kids. And so we're just going to say 4 kids, there's some boys and girls in there. And then these are the people that eventually, if they're matched to housing, they're going to be together in the same unit. So we don't want to include anybody who the head of household does not want to be living with if they're matched to housing. So from there, we want to complete the preliminary eligibility. This is the information. You can read through these in detail, and you will want to get these accurate. And when you do your training scenario, you can look at these questions and read them thoroughly and fill them out. So this question is for youth only, 18 to 24. We are not going to ask these questions. They're only for youth. This does determine, helps us determine the youth homeless status and where they can be placed. And so you'll want to understand these questions. So as you're going through your fake client scenario, please read through these regardless of the age of your client, the age of your fake client. And so what we do, because this client is an adult, she's 30, I think I said 34, she is living, I believe I said she's living behind a library that's definitely homeless. So what you can do is you can go through, we do have a hover over, you can read some of these, but you can also just really understand the definitions of what people's homeless status is on this and have that reference handy. So she's definitely homeless, they're outside. The diversion determination questions are something that we're looking to moving out of this assessment, although it is something you're going to want to complete. And if for some reason there is a way to move this client out of the system and not have them be assessed to begin with, and instead link them with other options or alternatives, then you want to fill this out and then put yes, they were diverted. In that case, this is where you would stop the assessment. However, typically if you're already in the assessment, chances are you've determined that the client needs housing and needs to get matched to housing, so you're going to continue with the assessment. Okay, so we're at the length of homelessness questions. These questions are really key to getting at the housing situation of the client and the history, the present situation and the most recent history. So we want to get these really accurate. First of all, we're going to start with the housing history tool, which determines the most recent 5 years of their housing status. So you're going to fill in not only their homelessness situations in here, but also their housed. So I'm going to go back 5 years, and anything that overlaps with the last 5-year time frame, I'm going to include in here. And so what we want to do is overlap the end date of the most recent event with the start date of the next one. So for example, I'm going to start way back. Our client Ida says that she was living with her husband from, let's see, she was living with her husband to October 1, 2017, and she had been there for 10 years. So she was there 10/1/2007 to 10/1/2017. She was living in her own apartment or house. In Nevada, let's just say. So what we're going to do is we're going to save and add another. And the start date of this situation has to equal the end date of that last situation. So it's 10/1/2017. And so what she had said to me was that currently she's living behind a library outside, but before that she was in a shelter, and before that she was with a friend. So her friend, she had been living with her friend from 10/1/2017 for a year and a half. So she was with them till 4/1/2019. And that was family or friends residence. And this was after she had left her husband, who was physically abusive. So this was in, let's just say now she's in Chicago, right? So then I'm looking at the end date because that's going to be the start date of my next situation. So I'm going to save and add another. And then she was living in a shelter for a while. So she was in a shelter until June of this year. And then, so she was living in a shelter, but she wanted to get out of there. It was really uncomfortable, and the summer came, and so she decided they could live outside. So then 6/19/2019, this is important. What we're going to do is add the final situation. The final situation currently is she's living outside. So we're going to save and add another. And what did I say? I said 6/19/2019 was the start of when she was living outside. And then we're going to leave this end date open. This is really important to leave this end date open because we want this time to be continued to be counted. So this type of place is a place unfit for habitation. She's outside on the street. Okay, and then we're going to save and exit out of there. So this is the entire housing history tool. I don't have any gaps. I have all the type of places entered, and none of the type of places entered contradict with the location I said she was at. So you want to make sure these match, and then you want to leave this open. So then next we want to go to the current residence or living situation. So essentially that's the day, what's currently happening, where did they stay last night. So we know that this person stayed in a place not meant for habitation. They are homeless. These questions try to get at where this current client typically stays. And so a typical scenario is, a rule of thumb is about 3 weeks. So let's just say, because this client has been staying on the street for a couple of months, we're going to say yes, that this is typically where this client stays. And again, what we're trying to get at is A, where can we find this client if they're matched, and B, are they sheltered or unsheltered? Because again, that plays into our prioritization for housing, and if they're unsheltered, they have a higher priority for housing placement. And so if yes, and selected a situation that falls under place not meant for habitation, please ask for the type of place they usually sleep and or of the community in which the individual often engages. And so this just gets at a little bit more of the situation that they're staying in. And I'm going to just say that they're staying on the street because they're literally on a sidewalk by the library. But if they said no, where do they typically sleep, then you're going to want to answer the question and then again get into more detail about that. You can always add some more detail. Ida stays with her kids in a tent on the sidewalk by the library, and I can't type. Okay, so then then we want to drill into these other chronic homeless questions, so we're continuing down from up here. We had this current residence living situation. They're in a place not meant for habitation. This brings us down to here, the length of stay in the previous place, which of course means the outside on the sidewalk. And that, if we're assuming today is August 15th, 2019, that is about 2 months. So what we're saying is it's 1 month or more, but less than 90 days. And then when we look at the approximate date homelessness started, if you hover over this, gives some more information about that. But what we're trying to get at is this current situation of homelessness. So let's just say, because what we're seeing in her history is that they were in a place unfit for habitation and then they were in emergency shelter. Both of those scenarios constitute homelessness. And so what we're going to do is look back on this beginning of this whole situation of homelessness, and that's from April 1, 2019. So we'll say 4/1/2019. Regardless of where they stayed last night, number of times the client has been on the streets, in emergency shelter, or safe haven in the past 3 years, including today. And again, that's just one. That's one time, because they didn't have any breaks in their homelessness of more than 7 days. And then total number of months homeless on the street, in emergency shelter, or safe haven in the past 3 years. Again, we're just going to go back to April, so it's about 4 months. So moving on from there, we do want you to accurately describe the income and education, the AMI level, and whether or not they want to continue to increase their income. We talk to clients about their criminal justice involvement. We want to know, we focus on housing choice because we want to make sure we place people where they're actually going to stay and accept their housing. And then any documentation you might have, you can include here, and you can upload it where I had said in the client profile area. Again, these questions down here, you're not gonna finish, but what you will do now is you have to save and then add the VI disability. So we're gonna save, and yes, if you were doing this for real, you would want to fill these out. But for now, we're just gonna save it, and then we're gonna go back, and it's gonna ask me again. I'm gonna say no, and then you're gonna scroll down, and again, you're gonna wanna really read these questions and make sure that all of this information is completed accurately. So you're gonna, with this client consent, you have this supplemental client consent, which includes information about disability, and so you're going to say whether or not they agreed to share. And we, for coordinated entry, we don't need any of that information. For kids, we want to know whether or not the head of household has a disability. That's what we're most interested in knowing. And then, so you want to fill all this information out accurately, and especially making sure to complete whether or not the client has a disabling condition. And we'll just say for this scenario, yes. And you can read the definition if you hover over right here. And then you continue on to complete all of these questions accurately. We're going to fill out this vulnerability index, and because this is a family, we're going to complete the family vulnerability index. And so again, as you're doing your fake client scenario, you can really dig in here and complete these questions accurately. Okay, so if you were to have filled that out, it would show up right here. And then if a client doesn't appear to, their situation doesn't appear to match what they are communicating to, you can fill out this information and let us know if you think they may have a disabling condition right there. So I'm going to go ahead and save and exit out of the assessment. So now we've got our entry here. A couple of things: you're not going to exit people out of coordinated entry. We will do that. If you see that somebody needs to be exited, you can email us, you can email me, carvelin@allchicago.org, and then I can exit them. But what you will be doing is adding updates. And so, for example, let's just say you had to meet with the client again a couple days later because maybe she got a cell phone, right? So you're going to add an interim review type update, and we'll just pretend it's a couple days later, save and continue, and then you're going to find the contact information and fill it in. And then save and exit. And so what happens with that is that when you go back, you'll see this little number 1, but also if you go back in, you'll see a little, you'll see the history of the client record. So you'll see the history of everything adding up here. So if you were to overwrite that and add new information, it would overwrite over that information. So for example, if another assessor comes in to this client record and wants to add an update, let's just say it's weeks later, they need to add an update, you're going to come in and they would change the name and then we want you to overwrite all of the assessor information, but what we've been seeing is that assessors haven't been doing that, and then we can't contact the most recent assessor. And so, but just know that all of that information is still there. So for example, the first assessor's information is still handy there if we need to look back on the history. So that's it. You really, all you have to do is fill out as completely as possible, and so that when the client is matched to housing, we have as accurate information as possible. You will be contacted when the client is matched to housing. That's it. So thank you, and I will look over your fake client scenario and send you feedback on that. Thank you.